My name is Dr. Nish Sonwalkar, and I have taught as well as I have been teaching for many, many years. I came to this country after I graduated from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and then I came to Massachusetts Institute of Technology and did my PhD program there. After I finished my PhD, I was faculty in mechanical engineering department, and because I was very interested in applying technology in education, I kind of took leadership role in that and became the founding director of Hypermedia Teaching Facility. And that's where I did lots of pedagogical experiments. So before I get into what is the result of those experiments and what I understood over the last almost 15 years or 20 years of my work in the area of education and education technology, let me first take you back about education in general. As you know, education is a big field. About $1.3 trillion are spent every year in education in the United States of America alone. And out of that $1.3 trillion, there are several segments. You start with K through 12, go to higher ed, which is called post-secondary, and then you can also go to professional education, you can also go to military education, and there are lots of continuing education that is happening. If you look at the universities of the United States, they are #1 universities: Harvard, MIT, Stanford, you name it. And as you know, I went to MIT, so I understand that a person like me who was studying in India, we all wanted to come to the United States and join one of the best universities in the world. And that leadership role of universities in the United States is still there. However, if you look at the K through 12 education, you'll be surprised that America is number 16 and it's slipping. And if you look at the amount of money that is spent on education in the United States, especially in K-12, it's enormous. It's almost equal to $600 billion a year. And it's coming around 6% of the GDP. So now the question is that so many resources, so many school systems, a lot of money spent into that. How come we are not leader in the K-12 education? So that's where I started thinking and starting to do experiments in terms of how do people learn. So my whole research has been based on brain-based learning models. How do neurons work in the brain and how we can use technology in a way that we can really make difference in terms of educational outcome. So that's where I started thinking and starting to do experiments in terms of how do people learn. So my whole research has been based on brain-based learning models. How do neurons work in the brain and how we can use technology in a way that we can really make difference in terms of educational outcome. So this is where we go to the K-12. If you look at K-12, the students come from all walks of life and they come with different background. We also talk about inner city kids, we talk about racial differences, we talk about different kinds of modality that people learn. So what I understood that there's always a gap between the teacher's teaching style and the student's learning style. So this is where we come up with a very broad generalization that what happens in the classroom, that when a student is trying to learn and if his style of learning does not match with the style of teacher, then there is a gap. And then what happens, student will fall behind and they will not keep up with the class. They primarily get very, I would say, dejected by the learning experience. They will ask questions, teacher will get annoyed, he doesn't have time to accommodate their personal learning strategies, and that's where this disconnect happens. So my whole thesis has been that if you come up with a pedagogical framework where we can accommodate every individual learning strategies and provide them content as well as instruction in the classroom with the way they want to learn, then they do extremely well. And I did lots of experiments in this area, including K-12, that we created learning models with 5 different learning strategies. And that's where we created what we call as adaptive learning systems. So the system have to understand the learning trajectory of individual learner and then respond to it in real time so that the content is presented to them in the learning strategy that works for them. And that's where brain-based learning model and cognitive psychology comes into play. So let's take an example. How can we do this adaptive learning? So once a student comes to this kind of system where we are trying to understand how they learn. First, we do a simple survey, ask them a few questions. How do you try to learn? When you learn, do you like to hear some of the real life scenario, or do you like to see some examples, or do you like to follow steps that are given to you? And that's where these different models. Do you like to hear some of the real life scenario, or do you like to see some examples, or do you like to follow steps that are given to you? And that's where these different models come from. Apprentice is step-by-step learning. Incidental learning is based on storytelling and case study. Induction is based on example. Deduction is based on learning by doing, project-based learning. And discovery is based on learning in a simulated environment, almost like game. You are in a game, you interact with the game, and you learn while you are doing the game, like learning interfaces. So if I can provide these kind of learning interfaces, let's say in the classroom, and then have teacher observe you, how you are learning in each separate learning strategies, and then provide you interaction as well as intervention if you are not learning properly, then two things happen. One is you are learning with your learning strategy of your choice. Another is teacher is able to identify this is the model you work with, so why not give you lesson plan according to that learning strategy, and then observe your learning and see that you reach your maximum potential. My firm belief is that everyone comes with a major amount of potential. They have lots of potential, but the problem happens when there is a gap between learning style and teaching style. That's number one. But then also there is this process of the mental process of understanding a concept and then interacting with your fellow student, which is called team-based learning, and then understanding from each other. So there's a lot of work now done in what we call social constructivism. So there are three schools of thought. One is called cognitivist, and then which is called behaviorist, and then we also talk about constructivism. And these all schools of thought are very important, but the learning theories are not connecting at the classroom level. So what we are providing, or what my effort for research for last 15 years has been, how I can use technology, make that technology available in a way that teachers can become very powerful with their understanding of the learners, and the learner can enjoy this learning process with the learning strategy that works with their mental model. In this case, especially in K-12, we can also expose students with different learning strategy and say, hey, this is not the only one way of learning, that I lecture you and then you remember what I give you the facts. But you can do inquiry-based learning. You can ask questions. You can do experiments. You can learn storytelling. You can do presentation. There are a lot of different ways when we can excite students to learn and understand the learning process. So my whole effort here is that once students enjoy this learning process, when the learning becomes fun with adaptive learning, then we see the learning outcomes go through the roof. And when we have done experiments, the learning, if you look at the learning outcome, which is normally 50 to 60%, even in the classroom, we have taken it to 90 to 95% learning outcome. That means every student becomes 90 to 95% expert in the area and the courses that they are doing. And this idea that if you provide adaptive learning system, both online as well as in classroom, then we can see what we call as a enormous change in the way people think about learning. Because right now, when the students go to school, they think learning is drab. Learning is a chore that they do not want to do. But once they understand the joy of learning with adaptive learning, they'll be hooked on this adaptive learning system just like they get hooked on the games. They'll spend hours and hours and hours learning. And don't you think that is the better way of learning? This is what we are trying to achieve here with adaptive learning system. And I want to invite you to join me in this revolution where we can change the entire world of education with the systems that are responsive, that are adaptive, that are personalized, and they can really make a difference in education at all levels. Thank you.